After e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, and bishop b5, the Spanish opening is on the board. Black continues with f5, and we're playing the Schliemann Gambit. So in this video, we're going to go through d3 once again, just like in the previous video. But the difference is that after pawn takes and pawn takes back, and knight f6, as we know, putting pressure on the pawn. In the previous video, we went through bishop takes, knight, and then the knight taking the pawn in e5 and everything that happens next, and why that pawn is not actually free. In this video, we're going to go through white castling straight away. However, before we get there, let's see once again what happens after bishop takes knight. Now, as we know, we have to take with the b pawn and now castle. So the difference is from the previous video that we're looking at bishop takes once again, but without the knight taking the pawn immediately. Right now, this pawn in e5 is actually a target of the white player. We can't give it up, so we have to play d6. And now the game continues. So black has the bishop pair, which is already good. So white had no reason to actually take the knight. So let's quickly see a few moves ahead on how to take this game before we go to the main topic of the video. Okay, so now what the white player has to develop. We're going to go through this move. We haven't seen this type of idea yet. Knight d2 with the idea, of course, since this is a e4, e5 type of game, the knight wants to go to f1, g3, f5. And that is also the best thing that the white player can do. So now black continues, bishop e7, and after rook e1 and castle, it looks like a completely normal game. The only difference between this and any other type of Spanish opening is that right now we have a rook already on an open file. So that is the advantage that we have, which means that the plan of knight f1, knight g3, knight f5 is not a problem for us because we have one piece attacking it plus one piece that will be attacking it in the future no matter what, which is the rook. So knight f1, now the best move for black is a5. This gives the possibility potentially to play a move like bishop a6 whilst being defended by the rook. Also, we didn't have anything else to actually play. We want to be able to play d5, but we're not in this moment because the pawn in e5 is being attacked. And a move like bishop g4 here wouldn't make much sense because it's the type of position where, when the opponent has a knight in f1, you play bishop g4, but then they attack you, you have to move back, but then the knight in g3 can come with an attack on the bishop. You're wasting tempos and it doesn't make sense. So after a5, knight to g3, and now black plays queen to e8, especially because, think about it, the queen really, from d8, the queen didn't really have anywhere to go. It's completely blocked. So from e8, she will have perspectives to move along the board and attack better squares. So after knight to f5, black plays bishop takes knight. Surprisingly, but not too much actually, because after pawn takes back and queen d7, now there's too much pressure on the pawn in f5 and we have won that pawn. There's nothing that white can do to stop that. Defending pawn with the knight in h4 doesn't work because of knight to d5 with an attack on the white knight. So, of course, after swapping the bishop for the knight, we'll be able to take this pawn with a great advantage. g3 is not even worth seeing because, it's so amazing to take this knight, and then white player might not be losing material, but he'll be losing the game very quickly. So a move like queen to g4, putting extra defense of the knight, just doesn't help because you're still just going to take the knight and then the pawn. There's no compensation for white whatsoever. So in this position, as mentioned, white cannot save the pawn in f5. After queen to d3, pawn and e4 is at fork for the moment, but of course then this comes with a check, queen b3 check. But now black plays d5. The attack on the knight remains, so the knight has to move, and there's nowhere to go. I mean, let's say knight to e5 with an attack on the queen, but then queen takes f5, and after knight takes pawn in c6 with an attack on the bishop, then simply bishop to d6. And now there's a lot of problems for white to deal with, because after a move like knight g4, for example, you're going to have pressure in h2, pressure in f2. There's going to be so much attack. If knight goes back to d4, for example, to attack the queen, then simply queen to e5 wins the game because you're attacking the knight while still attacking the square h2. It's deadly. And in this position, if the knight goes to d4, for example, then knight to g4. In this case, the knight is protecting the pawn, but we have an idea of playing knight to e5, and that's actually unstoppable. So let's say h3, knight e5. This is how it looks like. This knight is placed in an amazing square, and it cannot be kicked out. Let's say bishop to f4, trying to attack the knight, then bishop to d6. This pawn chain in the center is really strong. It prevents any attack from white, and if the bishop takes the knight and bishop takes back, the dark squares in the center would also be controlled very well by the black player. Plus, the black player will inevitably win the pawn in f5 because let's say bishop takes and bishop takes, you're attacking the knight, you want to swap the bishop for this knight and then take the pawn. And if the knight moves, you can still take the pawn. So after white's best move is rook a to d1, black continues with a4 attacking the queen. The queen has to move. If the queen goes to c3, which is the best move, black plays rook a to e8, finishing development, also putting a lot of pressure on c6, but black is still in a position of great advantage. Let's briefly mention how the attack on c6 is not enough. So bishop takes knight, but now rook takes back, and now knight taking the pawn in c6 with an attack on rook is really bad because of rook e to f5. So we are now putting pressure on the square f2, and once we go there, it's going to be game over, of course. So if rook f1, then rook to g2 with a deadly attack. Black is completely winning, position evaluated around -5 as far as I remember. And in this position, if white takes the pawn in c6, so you might argue that black here might retain material advantage or equality, but still you just take, and after take, rook f5. Once again, material is equal, but now we have a lot of pressure over the square f2, and we're gonna go there no matter what. This cannot be avoided. The strength of the bishop in going to c5 is gonna be too much. So let's say, for example, rook e2 protecting the pawn, maybe planning to double up the rooks or something. Bishop to c5, and after rook to f1, now there's just as much defense as there can possibly be over the square f2, but it's not going to be enough, obviously, because now black plays rook 8 to f6, attacking the knight. Knight will have to go. The only square where he can go to that makes sense will be a5, but now e3, deadly move. Pawn cannot take because it's pinned, then rook taking the rook will be game over. Rook cannot take back because you'll just take everything straight away. So after f3, stopping the pawn for the moment, black plays rook to b6, targeting the pawn in b2, and also targeting the move bishop to b4, which traps the knight. The knight has no escape. If white plays a3 to stop bishop to b4, then you will still take the pawn in b2, and then eventually the pawn in a3 as well. So now we can finally go to the main topic of the video: e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop to b5, the Spanish opening, and now f5. After d3, as mentioned, we take the pawn, take, and now knight f6. And now we're going to go through hustling right away. Okay, so black continues with bishop to c5, immediately putting pressure on the square f2, which is important since we know that obviously the white player will want to play rook e1 at some point. Okay, three options we're going to look at. One of them is bishop takes knight now, then bishop c4, stopping us from castling, but it's some sort of transposition into an Italian, and also white will have wasted a tempo in that case. Then bishop to g5, and also knight to c3, very normal moves. Let's start from bishop to g5 straight away, okay? So the white player wants to develop a new piece. This looks very natural. Okay, you attack the bishop immediately. It's very important because you want to stop ideas like knight c3, knight d5, putting a lot of attack over the knight in f6. So now two things are possible. Either bishop goes back or bishop takes knight. If bishop goes back, you play g3, and after bishop g3, the potential pin over f6 has been neutralized. The idea of knight c3, knight d5 is no longer scary. Here you just simply place d6 now because of the double attack on the pawn in e5. So now white goes on with development. Knight to c3, you play a6. It's as simple as that. This game is very easy to remember. When the bishops come here, you can just threaten them. Let's see what happens after the bishop moves. Let's say bishop to c4. This looks really good. Stops the rook from going to g8, stops the king from castling, and also saves the bishop from the pawn. Okay, black now plays bishop to g4, pinning the knight, especially because we can play knight to d4, and this should be much better endgame for black. So if white plays h3 in this type of position, remember, when there's a bishop in g3, I call this the London bishop. That bishop is actually stopping potential g4 idea, meaning that you can play bishop h5 and the pin is going on forever. And the white player can't really get rid of the pin if queen to d3, for example, to still protect the knight, because our idea, of course, is to simply play knight d4, put double attack on the pawn and double up and isolate the f pawns files. So after queen to d3, you can just play knight to b4, and now the queen can't really go anywhere that makes sense. If the queen goes to e2 or d1, it doesn't matter. Black plays queen to e7 now, and this knight cannot be kicked out with a3 because our idea has already been achieved a few moves ago. Bishop f3 can come anytime we want. If queen takes back, now knight c2 wins a pawn, then places the knight back in d4. Black's king is completely safe. The knight is a monster, we're up a pawn, and white position is worse. Unless white wants to take with the pawn, but then we have achieved what we wanted. The white king will be less safe. The queens are still on the board. You can castle alongside. Well, first you're going to have to move the knight back to c6, but then the knight in d4 will be sitting amazingly. Yeah, the game will go on, but black has achieved a good advantage. So in this position, earlier we went through queen to d3, trying to get rid of the pin. What happens after knight to d5 by white? Let's illustrate this type of position. Here you just need to take the knight. And the idea why I'm showing this is, well, there's two reasons. It's still a way for the white player to try and get rid of the problem of knight d4 putting extra pressure over the f3 square. Now, earlier we went through queen d3 and we saw that it still leads to a better endgame for black. This time we're going through knight to d5. Yeah, we take, but now white can take back in three different ways. Pawn takes back comes with an attack on the knight, but we can still play knight to d4. Actually, let's go through this now. Okay, let's say if pawn takes back, you play knight to d4 and we are achieving what we want. Now you can argue that the white player though can play bishop to e2. What to do now? Well, you just take the bishop. Queen takes back, the pin is still on, and now black castles. And we've achieved once again what we wanted. The pressure of the square f3 is too much. We're going to be able to smash the opponent king side. Not only that, we still have the bishop pair, unlike our opponent. Our pieces are very well placed. So that move doesn't work. So here the white player can take with the bishop, but that's actually wrong. You might argue that bishop will take in b7 with an attack on the rook after the knight has moved. But the point is now black plays rook to f8 and we have achieved once again what we want, meaning we don't even care if white takes. Actually, we like it if white takes the knight because then we can take back and white has lost the bishop pair while we are still able to destroy the king side of our opponent, forcing this ugly doubling up of the f-pawns whilst the queens are still on the board on the opponent king side. So rook f8 will put the black player in a better position and the bishop now can't really go and help f3 in any possible way anyway. Here the last thing we're going to look at for this line is what happens after queen to d5. Now it looks like the white player has been able to unpin the knight. This knight can now move and you cannot really take the knight now doubling up the pawn as we've been planning to do for so long, simply because the queen taking back in d5 comes with a threat of checkmate in f7. What that means, the bishop can't really go to f3, otherwise queen f7. So now black continues with queen to f6 and now yes, we are planning to take this knight because the queen is protecting f7. We can also castle alongside and the knight can't really move away from f3 because knight to d2 for example, and now you can play knight to b4 attacking the queen. The queen's got really nowhere to go, she has to take the pawn in b7. Now black continues with king to d7 with a plan of playing rook to a7, winning the opponent queen. This forces the white player to one only move, which is a3. So white's gonna have to be an engine to find this move because after a3, best move by black is rook to b8, trapping the queen. And now white's best move is take the rook. Rook takes back, and after pawn takes knight, black has a queen for a rook and a knight. Rook takes back, and position is better for black. This was the best response for the white player in this position. In this position, once again, we notice how the knight can't really move anywhere because we have the attack on the queen, knight to b4. So knight to d2 kind of stops the queen from going anywhere, and then we can do the whole thing, knight b4, trapping the queen and so on. What happens if knight to e1? This allows the white player to go to the square d2 in case we play knight to b4, for example. Now this allows knight to d4. Black is threatening c6, which traps and wins the queen, and there's nothing white can do. Let's say, for example, queen to b7. Now black plays rook to a7. Amazing move. The queen will have nowhere to go. c6, attacked by the knight. d5, the queen will be running into c6. Once again, c6 is defended by the knight. So queen check, for example, simply king e7, and now the queen is going to be taken no matter what. The queen's got nowhere to go without being taken by a minor piece. In this position, one last thing we're going to look at, what happens after queen to d3 straight away, trying to protect the knight further. Well, we have once again achieved what we wanted. Bishop takes, and after queen takes and pawn takes, the best thing was to take with the queen, of course, because yes, you realize you're going to be weakening your king side, at least remove the queens from the board, so to give the opponent, to give your own king safety. At the moment we only have created, we have created a permanent weakness. We also have a pawn in e5 and a pawn in g5, putting control over f4 forever. So yes, it's good that we've created that weakness, but we haven't really created like a mating net or anything. So how to go on now? Knight to d4, targeting c2 and f3. We're gonna win a pawn no matter what. So after king to g2, developing the king, black takes the pawn in c2 with an attack on the rook, and then he's able to come back to d4 whenever. So this is gonna be a better endgame for black. Besides, we are putting pressure on the square f3 forever, and we're soon going to be doubling up the rooks on the f file. So let's make a recap. e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop to b5, and now f5. d3, we take, knight f6, and now castling straight away. Okay, bishop c5 as mentioned. And now we're looking at the move bishop to g5. So we attack the bishop immediately. Earlier we went through bishop h4 and you attack the bishop further until bishop g3 and so on. What happens after the bishop taking the knight immediately? Okay, obviously take back the queen, developing the queen, and after knight to c3, potentially going to d5 with an attack on the queen and on the square c7. Black plays the crucial move knight to e7, stopping the knight from going there. And pay attention to the fact that bishop takes knight to stop our knight from playing this knight to e7 move, where we want to basically stop our opponent knight from going to this very annoying and very strong outpost. Bishop takes knight doesn't work because of course you're going to have a pawn in the square c6 which will control the square d5 for a very long time. So after knight to e7, let's see two potential moves. One of them is knight e5 anyway. Let's see what to do next. The other one is knight to a4, thematic move to target this bishop. As a matter of fact, you can't really put the bishop in b6 because then you'd lose the bishop pair. White will be able to swap the knight for the bishop. Bishop d4, same thing. e3 and f2 are not accessible. b4 can be attacked by pawns. So here, just so you know, you have to be prepared. The move is bishop to d6. You have to save the bishop pair. And remember the plan, how the setup looks like in this position. You want to be able to play c6, then place the knight, the bishop in c7, and you're going to retain the bishop pair. So what happens after queen to e2? Let's go on a few moves. c6, and if the bishop goes back to d3, c4 would be met by a fork. So it had to be like d3. You couldn't go to a4 and then b3. It would have been better to be on this diagonal. I'm aware of that, but it just couldn't be because white compromised the light diagonal by going to a4 with the knight. So now black plays bishop to c7. And after castling, we're gonna be doing just fine. We carry on the endgame with the bishop pair. Let's see a few ideas. Of course, at some point we want to be able to play d5. So what happens after this type of move? c5, c4, which puts more defense over the square at d5. It looks like we're gonna be struggling to get any control of the center. Black continues with d6. And after c5, aiming at opening the files, so let's say pawn takes, and after bishop takes, we no longer have the possibility to play d5 with control of the center. Also, the white player might want to have a plan of playing knight to c5 and simply placing the rooks on more dangerous files. How to continue now? Black plays bishop to g4, so that's the plan you want to go for. Always go for this type of f3 idea. Double attack on f3 and win by creating a permanent damage on the f file. And you always have the option of playing rook to f8. This is now unstoppable. It's going to happen anyway. If the white player unpins the knight, still just do it before it's too late. Queen takes, pawn takes, and now rook to f8 very simply. But now king to g2, developing the king. Is this time the white player successful in defending the pawn in f3 and going to an equal endgame? No, because knight to g6, threatening knight f4, winning the game immediately. And after rook a to d1, defending the bishop because you're threatening a fork. Black continues with long castle. I'm going to mention now the fact that I mention every single video is that it's not like these very moves are going to happen, but these patterns will happen all the time. Yeah, the move orders are going to change. Some moves will change, but by knowing the ideas, by knowing the patterns, by knowing the plan, you'll be able to punish the mistakes when they do it. So in this case, we're going through what happens after knight to a4. Of course, the white player doesn't have to play knight a4. Well, yeah, we're going to go through what happens after knight d5. And if they don't do any of the things I'm showing you, that means they're making a mistake. And then it's up to your tactical level to get an advantage. So here, what happens after d4, for instance, trying to go to maybe e6, or simply just removing the bishop from the square where it's going to be forked because there was pressure on that bishop. Black plays d5 finally, and after take, it looks like we lost the pawn, but actually no, because if bishop takes or rook takes, whatever, you've got knight f4, right? So after the bishop goes back to b3, black plays d4, we have a passed pawn. So remember this d5 conflict, this is something you want to go for in this specific variation. After bishop to c2, putting more defense over the square d3, whatever. Now we're already in the end game, so there's not much we're going to be looking at. Knight to h4 check, king to g3, and knight takes in f3. We finally won that pawn thanks to the support of the rook. It was going to happen no matter what, so always look for the attack on f3. Bishop to e4 attacking the knight doesn't go anywhere. You just go back with the knight to g5. You're doing just fine. Black is much better. One last recap to close this video. So knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5. Okay, f5, d3, we take, knight f6, and now castle straight away. bishop c5 as mentioned, and now we're going through bishop g5. Okay, we attack the bishop immediately, and we're looking at the variation bishop takes f6, queen takes back, and now knight c3. Okay, knight to e7, crucial move to defend e5. What happens if, okay, earlier we went through knight a4. What happens if knight d5 comes no matter what? So there's an attack on our queen, so we're gonna take the knight. And now if the pawn takes back, you can just castle, and eventually you're gonna be able to play d6. Basically what this means is that the white player has given you the bishop pair for absolutely nothing but better development. You have so much pressure on the knight in f3, you're gonna be able to take, and after d6 nothing's gonna stop you from playing bishop g4, and it's gonna be such an easy win. A move like h3 in this type of position doesn't work because you can just take it, right? You have enough pressure over the knight in f3. So let's go back a few moves. Here, what happens after the queen takes? Now you might argue this is a fork, but of course the white player is coming with an attack on our bishop. So what to do now? Bishop to d6. We have to save the bishop pair. Otherwise there's basically not even a small advantage here. It's completely equal game. So what happens after rook a to d1? Very strong move by white, stopping us from playing c6 to attack the bishop and making a fork, because now there's going to be double attack on the bishop thanks to the support of the rook. Now black plays king to e7, putting double support over the bishop, meaning that now we are threatening a fork. So after goes back to e2, black's best move is a5. There's not much to do. This is one of those situations where you kind of have to mess around a bit, waiting for the opponent to make a positional concession. White's best move now, according to the engine, is knight to e1. Also remember, the reason why a5 was played is because after a move like c6, you don't want white to be able to go to this square, a5, and then away having so much choice on where to go next. c6 now will be possible because white will have less options. He will have to go to maybe to b3, but then you can attack the queen again, right? So those are crucial tempos that you're winning. However, after knight to e1, the best move by white, the best move by black is rook to f8, putting more control over the square f4, which is very important because the white player will never be able to push f4 basically. So two moves we're going to look at, and then we're going to close this video. One of them is f4, what happens after f4, and the other one is the best move, which is bishop to g4 by black. So after f4, black plays c6, attacking the queen. The queen has to go, so after queen to d2, black can take the pawn in f4. There's absolutely nothing for the white player. Let's go on by letting the white player playing only the best possible moves and see how to still win the game. Bishop to g4, black plays g5, solidifying the pawn structure, the typical type of pawn structure you get against when you're playing against the king's gambit, and you want to retain the pawn forever. After g3, let's look at this idea. Challenging this pawn, the pawn is pinned, black checks with bishop c5, and after king to g2, bishop to e3, now attacking the queen. The queen will have to move, queen to e2, and now black plays d6, offering a swap of these bishops. We're happy because we're winning this endgame. Position is evaluated as if black was almost up a piece. We're basically up a pawn, but also we just have a good attack going on. White's best move now apparently is bishop takes c8. We're going to take back. Now the plan for white is to play king to d7 and then queen to e6, targeting the weak pawn. This bishop can't really be removed from e3. It's sitting very well on that. This is a weak, isolated pawn of our opponent. We also up a pawn. So let's just go back to this position. We mentioned how f4 cannot happen. What happens after the best move, which is bishop to g4? Okay, black goes on with c6, attacking the queen. Queen d2, best move. And now black plays bishop to c7, typical pattern to remember. However, you might argue that in this case d5 is not going to be possible because there's too much attack over the square d5. So what is the plan going to look like? White goes on with knight to d3 now. The idea of going to e1 was to go to d3 eventually and reach other squares where the knight was actually going to be doing something, because from f3 the knight had access nowhere basically. So after knight to d3, queen to g5 is a very surprising move because it not only offers a swap of queens but also doubles up the pawn. So after take, what's happening here? We're going to be putting pressure over the square f2 forever. We got the rooks, we're going to double up the rooks. We also have opened another file on the opponent king, and we're going to use the bishop pair because this is an open endgame. So that is the advantage that the black player has. So after rook f to e1 and bishop to b6, putting pressure on that. The knight is defending f2 at the moment. So let's look at two ideas. One of them being h3, the other one c4. c4, white to play c5. This stops the influence of this bishop, the bishop will be forced to go back to c7, where it's still going to be useless. So how do you do it now? This is a that's why it's very important that you understand that we don't have to memorize moves, but rather see patterns. This is a pattern. Remember, what do you do when they try to make your piece very ineffective? So this is why I say it's important not to try and memorize moves and stuff. Try to remember patterns. For example, here you have a threat of having your piece completely ineffective. Okay, then what do you do? Think about it. Okay, we like being on this diagonal because we're doing a lot of pressure. Okay, then just go up 2 squares, stay on the same diagonal, and avoid the trap. Remember, when a minor piece like a knight or a bishop is sitting in a square that cannot be attacked by a pawn, they are sitting on a throne. So if instead of c4, white plays h3, black goes on with d6. Again, we are happy about this swap. And after the best move, which is bishop takes, of course we are planning to take this bishop and double up our opponents as well, but in this case we have a stronger attack on the opponent king. Our king is instead very safe. So bishop takes, rook takes. This is white having played top engine moves for the last 22 moves. What happens now? Okay, let's see, b3. This is one of those situations where you can't really move anything without compromising yourself too much. Okay, bishop to d4. And after a4, black plays b5. Black is winning, by the way, because we're going to be able to open the file for this rook no matter what. It's going to be too strong. We're going to have too much pressure over f2 at some point. And even after rook to c1, preparing maybe to push this pawn to c3, kicking the bishop away, black just plays b4, and now c3 can never happen. After rook to e2, putting more protection over the pawn in f2 so that this knight is free to move, black plays rook to f6, preparing to double up. And after knight to e1, idea of going to f3, threaten this incredibly strong bishop, but simply attack the pawn in g5 as well, and putting the knight in a square where it's going to stop our pressure over f2. Even then, black plays g4, stunning move. This stops the knight from going to f3. But after pawn takes back, we have lost the pawn. However, black plays rook to h6. And yeah, it's not an easy endgame. The advantage here is minimal, but this is to assume that white will have played top engine moves forever, which is not going to happen. I've done my best to illustrate as many patterns as possible that typically arise when you play the Schliemann Gambit against the Spanish opening, and I hope you're going to remember as many as possible. After knight to f3, let's go on a few more moves, and then we close the video. Black doubles up on the h file. After king f1, only move so to play knight to g1, rook check, knight to g1, and now c5, because there's just not much to do. The center is now closed and black has better chances. After rook to d1, only move, king to d7, rook to d3, pawn to c4 is the best move by black in this situation. The reason is simple, we want to be able to start targeting the doubled up pawns of our opponents. So after rook to h3 though, which is the best move by white, because otherwise he will never be able to move the knight and black will inevitably be better. So after rook h3, best move is to take the pawn in b3. And obviously white wants to take back, otherwise we're going down with the pawn, it's very dangerous. Now here the best move is to take the rook in h3 with our rook in h1. And after white fixes the pawn structure with pawn takes, black plays rook to c8 and is preparing to go for this backwards pawn. So this is it. At the end of this insane line, playing this gambit and using top engine moves by both sides with explanation should allow you to remember as many patterns as possible that you will employ when facing the Spanish opening. Let's go on. Rook to e1, trying to protect the pawn in b3, but still rook to c2 comes now with an attack on f2. Rook to e2 doesn't work to stop that because rook to c3 wins this pawn. Rook to b2 doesn't protect the pawn because rook check, then the bishop wins the rook. If instead to block this move, white plays knight to e2 with an attack on this bishop finally, then rook to b2 wins the pawn. Knight takes, that's fine, we take back. And now there's no way for white to protect the pawn in b3. Best move is h4, of course you have a majority here, 2 against 1, you want to go down. So rook b3, king e2 developing, these are only the best moves. Rook to a3 stopping, winning the pawn in a4 as well. h5, rook taking the pawn. Now we have 2 passed pawns, but we have a silly rook, g5, and after b3, h6. Take, white is very close to promotion. Black's best move is rook to b4, you want to be able to reach this rank. And after h7, rook b8, and now Rook to h1 is not good because a4 wins for black. These two connected pawns are stronger than rook. If instead king to d3 to bring the king closer, a4 is still completely winning for black, -6 or something. And if instead rook to a1, which is the best move by white, attacking the pawn, we can't really defend that pawn. I mean, white can just promote. Black's best move is king to c6. If we manage to play, okay, so let's see what happens if white takes the rook. Now we can play b2 and we're winning, because if white promotes, we can take the pawn, and then the rook doesn't have access to b5 to take our pawn because we have a king in c6. So this is game over. And last line, if white plays king to d3, you still play a4, and after promotion in a queen, take, and now rook to b8. White's only move is rook to a1, and this should be ending in a draw, assuming that the white player will have played 49 top engine moves. In this specific line, we took it from that specific opening, the Schliemann Gambit, this variation, today's variation. You will never have to come this far in a game, but hopefully this was very instructive.